Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by George Dennehy. Looking forward to our conversation, George, today.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I spoke with George a couple of weeks ago, and you're just going to love him, listeners. You're just going to love him and his wisdom, and the power of this stuff is incredible. So, George, what does thriving adoptees mean to you? What words does that conjure up for you when you hear the name of the podcast?
Yeah, when I hear the name of this podcast and Thriving Adoptees and being invited to talk with you on the show, it really struck a chord with me. Pun intended, as I'm a musician.
Yeah,
Um, because most adoptees, their life didn't start out in a positive way a lot of the time. Uh, Oftentimes there was a mishap or being, in my case, being given up to an orphanage and unwanted, and oftentimes that's the case. So being able to thrive as an adoptee uh, almost sounds like it's ironic, because we didn't have things going for us
yeah,
from the very start, from the very
yeah,
formative years even. But as we see, there are many stories and cases of adoptees who are thriving. So really, I guess, beating those odds or overcoming those obstacles that started from the very beginning.
yeah. There's so much there. Then, the key word that stood out for me, George, is this word unwanted. Right?
Mm,
So many of us feel like that, right?
yes.
Yeah. What did that mean for you, and what does that mean for you now?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I mean, there's so many different reasons why a child will be put up for adoption in the first place, and a lot of the times it is because they're unwanted, or they're uh, uh, that's not what their biological parents wanted, was to have a baby or to be able to take, or they could take care of a baby, or whatever it is. And so for me, in my own story, I was born without arms, and it was a complete shock and surprise. And I was born in Romania, and kind of the turmoil in that country, and the living conditions of being in Romania in the 90s and so forth. So I was unwanted straight from the get-go, and I didn't have a chance to live in a home when I was born. I was born in a hospital and then immediately put in an orphanage, and I was also unwanted in the orphanage. I was malnourished and not taken care of, and kind of cast aside because of my disability of not having arms. And you know, the flip side of that is, again, is being adopted. So thriving adoptees, eventually we are adopted, and hopefully, and in a lot of cases, again, not all cases. That's kind of the trick of adoption, is not every case is a good case. But in a lot of cases, it is because uh, us who have been adopted are wanted by another family, and our value is seen and our worth is seen. And that was the case for me, where when I was adopted at the age of 2.5, I was adopted by a loving family here in the U.S., in the States, and I was shown what it looks like to be wanted, to be loved. And that's been my whole life, is this idea of not just surviving as an adoptee or as a person with a disability, but thriving. We're not here on this planet just to live, and we don't want to just get by. We want to we
Yeah,
want to thrive. And
yeah.
so yeah.
Wow. Um, so is there are you balancing up these changed circumstances and this changed so like has the love and the desire of your adoptive parents basically outshone the fact that you were unwanted by your birth parents? Is that what it looks like? What I mean, these
Yeah.
that sounds like I'm doing some sort of mathematical equation or something like that. But I guess I'm. I'm stunned, really.
Yeah,
And I'm keen to hear more about, but I don't know how if I put that in a particularly okay way, right?
no, no, you were fine, and that's one thing I'm excited about this conversation and to talk with you is we just get to talk and be open and honest and share our hearts with each other and then also with the listeners. And I think what you're saying, what you're getting at is definitely true. Kind of the idea that the love of my parents and being wanted by my parents who adopted me um, outweighs, I guess, the the history and the beginning of my life of
Yeah,
being abandoned and being unwanted. Um, and I'm not going to say that has always even been the case because as adoptees, I think we go through ups and downs. I mean, everybody in life goes through ups and downs, emotionally and internally, and struggling with identity. And you know, I faced a lot of my own struggles growing up, and even still do. You know, life without arms isn't always easy, and especially as a kid and being in grade school and being the different kid in class and writing with my feet while everybody else is writing with their hands, or eating with my feet while everybody else is eating their lunch with their hands. So I guess in my life, I've been very susceptible, I think is the word, susceptible to that struggle of fitting in and really being accepted and being wanted and feeling like I belong.
yeah,
So when things got difficult for me in school, a lot of those, I think, feelings and emotions from the beginning of my life bubbled back up to the surface. And again, the kind of those questions of who am I? Where do I belong? Do I even matter? Am I even wanted in the world? Can I even make a difference? And then also kind of how could I be wanted and how could I be in the right place when from the beginning of my life I was cast aside and where I was, in my head where I was
yeah,
supposed to be is what I thought. Where I was supposed to be, I didn't have a chance to be because my birth parents didn't want me. So almost like my whole life I felt like was not the way it was supposed to be. Um, and it took time and it took a lot of uh, I guess internal reflection to overcome that and to have a different mindset and a different perspective. And that's kind of where I am today is I'm a firm believer that our mindset and our perspective is so important and matters so much in who we are and who we're going to become.
yeah.
um, so yeah, it was a long answer to your question.
Yeah, well, this is
um,
big stuff, right? I mean, what strikes me, and I love your word outweighs, right?
mm.
Because I was what I realized is I was struggling over the question because I didn't want to use the word Trump, right? Because
Touchy,
some people are for him and some people are against him, right?
yeah,
So,
yeah.
but I guess so. I'm gonna remember that word outweighs because I'll be able to use that in the in the future. Because so what? I guess the question is then that your adoptive parents' love for you and their want for you, the desire for you to be in their lives, that outweighed the um, not being wanted by your biological parents.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And that's that can happen naturally, but then it's also kind of the side of the coin that I had to focus on too, and I had to take to heart too, because many adoptees, for a lot of different reasons and valid reasons, many adoptees can be very stuck on the fact that they were adopted, or they were an orphan, or they were unwanted, and things like that. And some adoptees can never escape that, and it's a very sad thing. But you know, me and my mentality and what I try to bring to people is that man, there's always a couple of different sides of a coin, and there's a lot of different ways to look at life, and there's a lot of different perspectives to have. So instead, for me, I had to almost bring myself to have that perspective of, well, instead of focusing so much on the fact that I was given up and the fact that I was unwanted by my birth family and all these negative things. Well, let's instead focus on the fact that I was chosen. I was chosen by my adoptive family. I was specifically picked out among, you know, and not to brag, but among hundreds and hundreds of other orphans in the world. My parents looked out on the whole world and picked me. And that again, that word outweigh, that should outweigh the more negative side
Yeah.
of the beginning of my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Um, Another thing that strikes me, George, is that the what others think of us, is one thing. Other people's desire for us in their lives is one thing, but our love for ourselves is something completely different.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm compartmentalizing here. How do you see that? Am I over compartmentalizing? What does it feel like for you?
No, no, you're absolutely right on track and on the mental wavelength where I was going to as well, because that's kind of where I don't know the term that's used, where the road meets. I'm not going to try, but that's
The
where it
rubber
all
meets
comes.
the road. That one?
Yeah,
When the
yes,
rubber meets
exactly.
the road, yeah. Okay.
That's it. Yes, yeah, because really, I mean, from in my life, I was fortunate and I was blessed to have parents that adopted me, that loved me, to have, I grew up in a very large family. So my parents, they had three children of their own, and they adopted 10 other children,
Wow.
including myself. So I was fortunate to grow up in a very just different, unique, loving, mostly loving family, and very loving parents. And um, I grew up in a nice small town and had good friends growing up and everything. Um, and then struggled in school and had those issues with being different and being bullied, and went through all my things. So all that to say, we as people, we could have support around us. We could have loving parents. We could have loving friends. We could have all these things. But if we can't bring ourselves to love ourselves, then none of that really matters. None of that's really going to truly hit home, because I think eventually it ends with us. We have to get to that point personally where we accept ourselves, and we believe in our own
Yeah.
worth, and we believe in ourselves, and having that support around us can help that. Um, but there's life is so interesting because there's people in the world who have all of the support that you could ever ask for, but they don't believe in themselves, or they don't love themselves. Or on the other side, there's people in the world who have no support, who grow up in traumatic lives, and uh, have nobody. But then they believe in themselves, and they bring themselves to a good place.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like where you were going, because that's exactly where my thought process was going.
Yeah.
Was it eventually we have to decide for ourselves?
Yeah. So you used the word eventually there, and you talked about there being a point. Was there a specific point that, or a specific event, specific memory, a specific place in time where self love um, dawned for you, shall we say?
Yeah, yeah. I think there was, and for me, it was kind of during this grade school time, and kind of more later in grade school. So it would be kind of high school for me. So maybe age 16 or 17, when I was kind of in the thick of it. I was in the thick of feeling alone and being bullied and being picked on, and not really having many good friends in school. And I kind of got to this point where, um, again, there's perspective. Perspective is everything, you know. And I really began to ponder that, and to even meditate on it. As this high schooler was, here I am at this school where I'm being picked on and being bullied. I don't have any arms. I was adopted. I'm in this family with kids from other countries, and you know, I guess what am I going to do with all this? What am I going to do with my life? How am I going to live this life, basically? And a lot of the times, that's how we present ourselves and it's how we carry ourselves. So I began to have this perspective change, and in a good way, in a positive way, and began to look at myself more positively. And in turn, I began to carry myself more positively and even confidently. So instead of walking around school nervous and ashamed of who I am and almost expecting the negativity from everyone around me, I started to bring myself to walk more confidently
Yeah.
and be more friendly and just be more who I am and be more open. And over time, and it happened pretty quickly. Other kids began to see me for who I was and who I actually am, rather than just seeing me for my
Yeah.
disability.
Yeah. Do you remember the turning point?
Um, I don't remember a specific turning point, to be honest with you. It was more so I guess, a very quick, gradual change. There was a moment in school when um, it was very simple. And so I traveled this country and sometimes other countries as well to share my story and to play music. And I play guitar and piano with my feet and I sing. So I share this story, especially at schools, because something very simple happened at my school that really helped in this shift in my life. And it was very simple. I just was in a class one day, and it was a music class, and there were these two friends who were sitting and talking and laughing and just goofing off and goofing around and having just enjoying each other's company. And I was sitting alone, as I usually did, and they invited me to come sit with them. And I went over and sat with them, and from then on, we were the best friends for the rest of our time in high school. And we were inseparable. We were close. We did a lot of things together. We went to church and youth group and did lots of just. They became my closest friends. And it was
Wow.
very simple. That's all it was. They just invited me to come sit with them because they noticed that I was alone. And so when I go, and I especially go to schools, I share that story and I just tell all the other kids, I said, if you see somebody sitting alone, uh, invite them. Just invite them over. They might say no, and that's okay. Some people want to be alone, and that's okay. Um, but you never know. You never know what can happen. So to your question, I think that was a moment that really helped in this kind of shift for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're brought up in the Western world to believe uh, that the outside world determines our feelings.
Mm.
And a simple way of kind of illustrating that is this we you and I started our conversation talking about the weather, right?
Mm.
Um, and I don't know if you have this in the States or not, but we've got this thing here in the UK called miserable weather. Have you heard that?
I have. I've heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, miserable weather. Do you have that in the States as well? Miserable weather?
Okay.
Yeah.
Occasionally, if we're thinking about the same thing,
Yeah.
but maybe go ahead and explain
Well,
further.
so we're raised on this idea that the outside world determines our inside world.
Mm.
And everybody and miserable weather is one of those things. And if I sometimes get onto this conversation with some people say, well, yes, but all the ADD, like so not ADD, people will talk about this as, it's a syndrome,
Mm.
the lack of vitamin D from sunlight in the winter and all these different things, right? Well, but those are all kind of belief, aren't they? Isn't it driven by belief? We believe that the outside world determines how we feel on the inside because we're brainwashed by everybody else in society
Hmm.
that thinks the same, you know. And
Yeah, that.
and if we and if we disagree with them,
Hmm.
then they're going to other us, and they're going to think that we're blaming them, you know.
Yeah, yeah, that's such a good point, and it's such an overarching uh theme for life too. So as you were talking about that and kind of how it's portrayed there in the UK, kind of a miserable weather. Yeah, makes me think of like seasonal depression, how we have it in the
Yeah.
US.
Yes.
And
Sad. Yeah.
and
Seasonal affective disorder.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's a
And
thing. It's a thing. Oh, yeah, it's a thing. Well,
yeah, it is a
but what
thing.
drives the thing?
Exactly, yeah. What drives the thing? How external is it? How external is it compared to being internal? And I think that's so tough with so many people, because so many people allow their circumstances to determine uh, to be the driving factor of who
Yeah.
they are on the inside.
Yeah.
And man,
And
and
me
if
too. Me too. Sometimes it's an illusion, but I fall
yeah.
for it all the time too. I'm not saying I'm above this.
Oh yeah, it's a struggle, and it's something that I've had to be extremely mindful of, because I don't have arms. If I always let my external circumstance determine my internal thoughts or feelings, man, I would get nothing done, and I would live life with no hope. And yeah, I mean, we have to. We That's why we have to be intentional. All of us, we have to be intentional about being planted on the inside, being confident on the inside. So then, not if, but when life gets hard, and when life gets challenging, we're not swayed by those external factors that do go up and down, because life is full of ups and downs. But if we can remain stagnant and uh, and rooted, I guess, then we can overcome anything.
Yeah, and it's about seeing the roots.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, playing devil's advocate is, like I've been on another adoptee podcast called Pull by the Root, right?
Hmm.
So a lot of adoptees say, well, I don't know, I can't be, I can't be confident because I don't know my roots.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I've definitely heard that too. I mean that's a hard place. That's a hard place to be, because if people don't know where they come from, or where they're from, or yeah, like you said, their roots, then it can be harder. It can be more challenging then to be planted. Um,
Yeah.
and I guess to those people, and in those cases, I would say, and I would just encourage, make your roots, and make your own roots.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah,
There's
that's
I'm struggling for stuff as well, for a comeback on that, and that's quite unusual for me because I'm normally pretty quick with a suggestion, right? I'm trying to do less unsolicited suggestions, but I
yes, yeah,
find myself doing that. I guess our we have to find our own way to this stuff, and it's a going within thing.
yeah, exactly. And then bringing it all back to thriving adoptees. Yeah, like that's kind of that's what makes it hard, is people, those of us who have been adopted, our entire start to our lives, and our roots are kind of have all been jumbled up and switched around and changed and replanted somewhere else with the act of adoption. So that's why I love, hopefully, being able to thrive myself as an adoptee, and to see others who have been adopted also thrive, because it's almost like, even though we went through all that we went through at the very beginning of our lives. Here we are thriving, and that can be an encouragement to so many people.
Yeah. And you said that you thought it was ironic. There was a sense of irony in putting the two words together.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, it's almost like it would. It almost to me it almost sounds like it would be an ironic thing, but it rarely ever actually is, because so many adoptees do thrive. So it's so encouraging to see, like, man, again, like, even though for me, even though I was born in this Romanian orphanage and given up to or born in this Romanian hospital and given up to this orphanage where I was not fed and I was neglected, and I weighed 9 pounds at 2 years old, and I was sick and I almost died. Even though I went through all of that in the very first couple of years of my life, the most important years of a human's life, um, here I am now, thriving as an adult, as a 31-year-old.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and, it almost seems like it would be ironic, like
Ironic. Yeah.
a baby in that, and somebody whose life starts like that should not be able to end up where they are now.
No.
But
Can you just
we,
give me the weight and the year and how old you were? You were 9 pounds at how old?
yeah, I was not 9 pounds at 2 years old, which that would have been
That's
1996.
wow.
And that was because of the malnourishment and
Yeah.
the abandonment and not being taken care of because I didn't have arms. And it wasn't because the conditions were. I mean, the conditions were lacking and they were poor, of course. But on top of that, I didn't have arms, so the nurses, I was last to be cared for always, and um,
Wow.
so yeah, that's why I just love. I love the podcast, and I love the name thriving adoptees, like
Yeah.
adoptees who can thrive. How can that happen? And we get to show the world how that can happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the misconceptions is that it means that everything in the garden is rosy or that we don't have down days,
Mm.
right? Or down moods. Um, that it's all is sunny. There's still some darkness sometimes, but I I guess more light than dark. How
Yeah,
do you see that?
yeah, I think you're right. It's yeah, it can be challenging, because we can thrive as adoptees, and we can overcome the beginning of our lives and our own individual stories of being orphaned or being adopted or things like that. We can overcome that, and we can years and years later be in, doing our own thing or living our own lives. But the fact remains is that we still have that experience as orphans or
Yeah,
as adoptees. So,
yeah,
like you said, that little piece of our lives is always there.
yeah,
And whether that's a very physical, metaphysical thing that's still there in our own minds or our own bodies, or an emotional thing. So yeah, that piece is always there and is always going to be there because it's part of our history. It's part of our lives, and
yeah,
sometimes that's going to come out in different ways, and sometimes it's I'm not really sure how to word this. Sometimes it could just randomly pop up in our minds on a sunny day, on a Saturday afternoon. We could just randomly think about that.
You
And
mean
and
a dark memory pops up? Is that what you're talking about?
yeah, a dark
Yeah,
memory, or just the mere fact of how our lives started, could just, because it's always going to be there, like you said.
yeah. You use the word metaphysical. Can you explain what you talked about the
Yeah,
emotion? I can get the emotional stuff, right? But what do you
yeah.
mean by metaphysical?
Um, that, I hope that was the right word I used. I think I just used it maybe just to add in another term.
Okay.
But I think what I was going for was, you know, at, so from the very beginning of our lives, you, me, other people who are adopted were given up. Oftentimes we were unwanted, and sometimes we weren't cared for. So those very basic needs that humans have, a lot of us weren't given from the very beginning. So that those kind of things could even pop up in our own, uh, I guess, bodies, even like later on in life, when it comes to our own interpersonal relationships or family life or uh, how people treat us on the outside. You know, that sometimes that could cut deeper for us because um, we were treated such a way
Yeah.
in the very beginning. So I don't know if metaphysical was the right word. Um,
Me neither.
but maybe somebody listening could
Yeah.
correct
It's
me on this,
that.
and I welcome that because I may have uh, um, incorrectly
I
through that
know.
through
No
that.
worries. No worries.
Um,
Um,
but that's what I was going with. I think our own physical nature, our own bodies, um, kind of hold those things for the rest of our lives.
yeah. People say that the issue is in the tissue, as in, in our human tissue, and the body keeps the score
Yes.
is the
Yeah.
book by Bessel van der Kolk there. The uh, the therapist guy, and that book's only been around like 10 years. The body keeps the score. The idea
Yeah.
that, so, like, trauma wasn't a thing until after Vietnam, right? So in
Mm.
the First World War, British troops were told, it was the condition that they were given, was the name for the condition was shell shock, right?
Yeah.
So that PTSD was called shell shock then. PTSD, the term wasn't, um, the term wasn't around.
Right.
And um, and I was interviewing a researcher
Mm.
around PTSD and trauma and other similar stuff to that about 4 years ago. And this wasn't for the. I wasn't sorry. I wasn't interviewing. This was for the podcast. Actually, this wasn't for the podcast. This was just a conversation, and I was talking to somebody who is a PTSD researcher, and I said, "So what?" Because not everybody that goes into who endures these events gets PTSD,
Mm.
and I think it's actually the minority, from what I can hear, from what I've heard. I'm going to dig around that, and So I was talking to this researcher, and I said, "So what's the difference that makes the difference?" And she reeled off a load of factors, different factors, and I said, "Well, all those are all those are on the outside. All those are external factors. What are the internal ones?" And
That's
she didn't know. She didn't
huh.
have an answer.
Interesting.
And yeah, and I've got to say, I judged her in that moment. To put it politely,
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting when it, there's not always a clear cut answer. Yeah. To the root.
well, if you're a researcher for PTSD and you can't give and you haven't got a clue about the internal factors that drive whether somebody gets PTSD or not,
Yeah.
then I would say that your research is a little you're researching yeah, your research is a little bit narrow, to put it politely.
Huh.
Shouldn't be the whole
Yeah.
point be to to know the internal factors, to look at the internal factors. But we're back to miserable weather again, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, and I think that that's where the focus needs to end up being is the internal,
Yeah.
whether that be family of origin or generational thing. You know, who knows? But um,
No, I mean
and
internal right now. I mean inside us right now.
yeah,
Our internal level of resilience. Our,
yeah,
how our whatever it is, our determination, our persistence, our ability to bounce back as it's within us right now.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, internal, and then that makes me think about yeah, why many people who were adopted and went through that in the beginning of their life can thrive later on, but then also why some other people who were adopted uh, can't, or they haven't yet. And yeah, going back to internal, there's something internal going on, and I apologize. I think I'm still stuck on metaphysical. I think one example that came to my mind as you're talking about PTSD and things like that is I think about even in my own family, my own brothers and sisters. You know, a lot of people who are adopted, or some people who are adopted, um, really struggle with relationships and even attachment, and there's a lot of children, especially who end up being adopted, whether from an early age or a later age. They There's a term for it. It's like an attachment disorder where they literally have no, like they physically cannot have an attachment to
Yeah.
their parents or to their siblings, and there's something to that based on their upbringing or their beginnings in
Yeah.
life. And you know, I for some people that's a struggle, and for others it's not. And again, it's almost like with PTSD. What Why is that?
Why
You
is that?
know? Yeah,
And like, why aren't we studying the internal factors? Why aren't like we've got to go within.
yeah,
We've got to continue to do our work in whichever way our work works for us. You know, what other so whether it's videos on YouTube, whether it's podcasts, whether it's audiobooks, whether it's therapy, whether it's EMDR therapy, whether it's somatic therapy, whether it's whatever it is, trying all those different things to unlock our own answers, find
exactly,
out find our own and what works for us, what reveals uh, our what reveals our resilience. Because I think I think it's revealed resilience. I don't think it's strengthened.
right. Yeah, it's something that I'm just gonna keep this right here for now. It's sorry about that.
It's all
If you
right,
don't, I'm gonna my phone here is not wanting to stay up. Um,
mate.
no, I think yeah, I think you're right. I think resilience is revealed, and yeah, some people have it, and some people need to learn it.
Learn it. I think they need to find it.
Yeah, yeah, and find it.
It's like I'm at the edge of I'm at my edge of my ability to explain this. Where I normally go when I think about this sort of thing is like with um, something's looming, an event's looming large on the horizon for us, and we don't know how we don't think we're going to get through it, and then somehow we managed to get through it, and it was the resilience. It was our internal resilience that we hadn't seen before, and
Hmm.
don't really see until after the event. And I don't know how I got through that. Well, our internal inbuilt resilience, that's what got through us. But we can't see it. As in, it's not an object. So
Yeah.
am I being a bit esoteric? Am I being a bit metaphysical here, George?
No, no, it's important for us and people to talk about because I think that can get people to think a little deeper. You know, how can each one of us find our own resilience because we have to.
Uncovered. It's uncovered. It's discovered. It's within us, but we just haven't realized that it's within us
Yeah.
because we live in
Yeah.
a world that's so obsessed with the outside world determining how we feel.
Right.
The miserable weather. We're back to the miserable weather again. Well, I've been happy in the rain, and I've been very sad in the sunshine.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think one thing for me is I guess being learning to be content in any situation. And that's kind of been a factor and a foundational thing for my life is in any situation I'm in or any circumstance, uh, just being content. And again, yeah, not letting those outside circumstances really dictate and be the ruler of my world.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of a quote from one of my mentors. It goes something like this: um, beyond, beyond the, uh, beyond the high tide of happiness and the low tide of sadness is a big sea called contentment.
Yeah,
It's not quite his quote. I can't remember it in the moment. Um,
yeah,
one,
it's,
one of the words that you said, another one of the words that you said earlier on was stuck, George. You used the
hmm.
word stuck. I mean, do you mean like, and us getting stuck? Like we all get stuck. Uh, were you talking about beliefs or what were you? Do you remember what you were talking?
um, yeah, you know, I think when I mentioned people being stuck, it goes back to the external circumstances or our own histories. Is people can get so it, it it can be so easy to get stuck on an event or to get stuck on a past experience that was not so good, and then and being stuck in that can really uh, affect how things are now and not in a good way. Especially in talking about adoption and talking about um, those of us who were orphans. I've seen and known other people who were adopted who you know are still stuck on being given up or being unwanted by their birth family or um, things like that where that's been their focus and not in a good way. I mean, I think it can be healthy to want to discover more about who we are. But when what I've seen is many people who have been so focused on those beginning years of their life and being unwanted in their and being given up for adoption and I guess holding on to that resentment is maybe is what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
And resentment can be a poison
Yes.
that can really keep us from I guess for lack of better words living our best lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have to learn to let go of resentment. We have to learn to forgive. Not for, not always for the other person, but for us. For I love forgiveness because and grace, because those things more oftentimes do more for us who are giving
Yeah.
the forgiveness and giving the grace than it does for the other person.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, holding on to resentment can hold us back.
Have you have you any moments when you've seen your own perspective on this shift, George?
Um, yeah, I think for me, having that shift of being in high, it all for me, it all goes back to those high school years. It all goes back to that shift of um who I was, and going from somebody who just didn't think very highly of themselves, and um just ashamed of not having arms, ashamed of being adopted, and just being mad at the world, being mad at my birth family, being mad at my adoptive parents, being mad at you know God, even for not having arms, all these different things I was mad at, and holding on to that anger. And again, the resentment is what it comes down to. Holding on to that resentment, I realized it wasn't doing anything. It wasn't doing anything. Um, and I tell people this all the time, and this is kind of where I land the ship when I'm speaking, is it's easier said than done, and it sounds kind of like a hard pill to swallow, but just we can't control everything. Like there, uh, essentially, there's things in life that happen, and there's things in life that we go through, and we're born a certain way, and we're a lot of children are given up and unwanted and become orphans, and hopefully become adopted. Um, but we can't control all of that. I couldn't control the fact that I don't have arms. I can't change that. I can't change the fact that I was adopted into a family in the U.S. and unwanted by my birth family in Romania. I can't change that. I can't control that. And being angry about it, and being holding resentment and unforgiveness, again, that doesn't change anything. You know that doesn't change my circumstances. Um, the only thing I can do is change my perspective, kind of where we were talking about before, our internal perspective. So the only thing I can truly change is my own perspective, and my perspective, um, so oftentimes can be the determining factor of where I go in the future.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I don't know if that answers your question very
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think for me that's been, so it's the driving force
Yeah.
is kind of acceptance and perspective.
So what do you think changes our perceptives? Sorry. What do you think changes our perspectives, or what changes your perspective?
I think, well, so for me, it's definitely been my faith. Um, and so we all need things in our lives that give us hope, and that give us, I guess, meaning, and a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, things like that. So for me, it's definitely been my faith. Um, and I'll say, you know, without going too crazy into it, doing going too much into it, because I know people are listening from all different backgrounds and all different beliefs and things like that. And I can only share my own personal story, which I'm happy to do this morning. I being having grown up in church, and growing up in Sunday school and things like that, um, I struggled a lot with a lot of it because of not having arms and you know that question of, well, why, how could God do this, or how could God allow this to happen, or allow this to happen, or how could God um, allow me to be born without arms? What if God is so good and if he's so loving, then why does that happen? Things like that, which a lot of people ask, and I think it's valid. um, it's a hard, I don't say it's hard because I don't want to diminish people's intelligence, but it can be a challenging thing to accept, or to understand, I guess, or to wrap your head around, or my head around, certainly, is, how can a loving God um, allow me to make me be born without arms, especially if he made me, if he's the one who created me, he made me without arms. What's the deal? And that's kind of what I struggle with for so long. And again, I getting back to that place of perspective, and what questions am I asking in life, and realizing that I don't have all the answers, and I'm never going to have all the answers because I'm only human, and I'm certainly not the smartest human in the world. So um, I don't have all the answers. So instead of being angry, again, instead of holding resentment, and instead of asking the questions of God, how could you do this to me? How could such a loving God, what kind of God does this and what kind of God does that kind of thing? You know, in my own faith, maybe instead asking, well, maybe there is a purpose. Maybe he does love me. Maybe he does have a plan for my life. And what could that look like? And how can I find hope in that? So long answer to your question is kind of getting to that point personally for me of saying I'm going to find my hope in maybe what God has for me in this life. And people need to find what their hope is, and what their hope um, comes from. So for me, it's been my faith.
Yeah. Wow. That feels like a good place to bring it in, George.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Yeah, and again, yeah, that's again that's my own personal uh, journey, and where I've come from, and where I am today.
Yeah.
And I think what's most important, really, for anybody listening, is being able to have that perspective shift that can change the course of where you're going. So having that different perspective, and finding hope in your life, um, and being able to, for me, being able to thrive as an adoptee has all been because of those couple things: my parents' love for me, and being wanted by my parents, and having a different perspective on who I am, and then having my faith that drives me forward.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah. Thank you, Simon. This has been a great conversation. Um yeah, thank you for letting me open up, and thank you for letting me just this was I guess intellectually, it felt very engaging, and I really enjoyed it.
Good. We hope you liked it too, listeners, and we'll speak to you again very soon. Take care.